I sit here at this small kitchen table, the same one where I used to help David with his homework 40 years ago, and I can barely bring myself to lift the fork. The plate in front of me holds the leftover meatloaf from last night's dinner, a thin slice, maybe 3 ounces, accompanied by 2 spoonfuls of mashed potatoes that have gone cold and gray. This is my lunch. This is what I'm allowed. You're lucky I don't let you starve. Those 7 words loop in my mind like a broken record, playing over and over until they drown out everything else. The sound of the refrigerator humming. The tick of the wall clock. Even my own heartbeat seems to pulse in rhythm with his voice. You're lucky. You're lucky. You're lucky. 3 months. It's been 3 months since my son, my David, the boy I raised with such love and sacrifice, looked me in the eye and spoke those words. 3 months since something inside me cracked so deeply that I don't think it will ever heal properly. I used to think I knew what heartbreak felt like when my husband passed 15 years ago. I was wrong. That was grief. This is different. This is the pain of realizing that the person you love most in the world sees you as nothing more than a burden. I take a small bite of the meatloaf, and it tastes like cardboard mixed with shame. Every meal has tasted this way since that night. Food has become my enemy, a reminder of my place in this house that used to be my home. I chew slowly, mechanically, because I know David might walk in at any moment and see if I've cleaned my plate. He checks, you know. He actually checks to make sure I've eaten exactly what he's given me, no more, no less. The memory of that evening plays in vivid detail, as it does every time I sit down to eat. I had been feeling dizzy all day, weak in a way that scared me. I'd only had half a piece of toast for breakfast because David said I needed to watch my portions, and lunch had been skipped entirely when he got an important work call that ran long. By dinner time, my hands were actually shaking. I had cooked the meal myself. It was one of the few activities he still allowed me to do, though always under supervision. Meatloaf with mashed potatoes and green beans, comfort food that reminded me of better times. When David served the plates, I watched him give himself a generous portion, then his wife Sarah a normal serving, and finally, he placed a child-sized helping in front of me. I stared at that small portion and felt something desperate rise in my chest. My stomach was cramping with hunger, and the dizziness was getting worse. I remember gathering all my courage, and isn't that pathetic, needing courage to ask your own son for food, and speaking as gently as I could. David, honey, could I have just a little more? I'm still quite hungry. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stopped chewing. The kids looked up from their phones. And David. David's face transformed into something I didn't recognize. The son who used to climb into my lap when he had nightmares, who cried in my arms when his father died, who once told me I was the strongest person he knew, that son vanished, replaced by a stranger with cold, calculating eyes. Are you serious right now? His voice was low, controlled, but I could hear the anger simmering beneath. After everything I do for you. I pay for this house, I pay for your medications, I drive you to your appointments, I cook your meals, and you have the audacity to complain that it's not enough? I tried to explain, my voice getting smaller with each word. I'm not complaining, sweetheart. I'm just. Just what? Ungrateful. Manipulative. He stood up then, his chair scraping against the floor like nails on a chalkboard. Do you have any idea what it costs to support you? What I've given up? The sacrifices Sarah and I have made? I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller under his gaze. This wasn't my David. This couldn't be my little boy who used to thank me for every sandwich, every bedtime story, every scraped knee I kissed better. Then came the words that would haunt me. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, and whispered with a cruelty that took my breath away, "You're lucky I don't let you starve. This is my house now, and you eat what I allow." The physical reaction was immediate. My stomach clenched, not with hunger anymore, but with nausea so intense I thought I might be sick right there at the table. My hands began to tremble, not from low blood sugar this time, but from shock. The meatloaf on my plate might as well have been poison. I couldn't eat another bite that night. Or the next morning. Or for days afterward. Now, sitting here with another meager portion, I wonder how I became this person, this shadow of a woman who feels grateful for scraps, who apologizes for existing, who hears her son's voice every time she dares to feel hungry. The meatloaf grows colder as I sit here, and I know I have to finish it. Not because I want to, but because I'm lucky he doesn't let me starve. At least, that's what he tells me. It didn't start this way. That's what makes it so insidious, so hard to explain to myself even now. When I first moved in with David 2 years ago, he was the perfect son, attentive, caring, worried about my well-being. I was so grateful to have him, especially after the fall that changed everything. I remember that October morning like it was yesterday. I was reaching for my favorite coffee mug on the top shelf, the one David had made me in his 7th grade pottery class, lopsided and painted bright blue, when the stepladder slipped. The crack of my hip hitting the kitchen floor echoed through my empty house like a gunshot. I laid there for 3 hours before Mrs. Henderson next door heard my calls for help. The emergency room, the surgery, the weeks of physical therapy, it all blurred together in a haze of pain medication and uncertainty. But David was there through it all. He took time off work, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside my bed. He researched the best rehabilitation facilities, drove 2 hours each way to visit me every day, and when the doctors said I could go home, he wouldn't hear of me returning to my house alone. "Mom, what if you fall again?" he'd asked, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. "What if something happens and there's no one there to help you?" I'd never forgive myself. Sarah had nodded in agreement, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "We have plenty of room, Margaret. It would be our pleasure to have you." At the time, it felt like a blessing. After Harold died, that big house had felt so empty, so quiet. The idea of being surrounded by family again, of hearing David's laugh in the hallways and watching my grandchildren grow up close, it seemed like a gift wrapped in tragedy. The first few months were exactly what I'd hoped for. David converted his home office into a beautiful bedroom for me, complete with a small sitting area and my favorite reading chair. He installed grab bars in the bathroom and bought me a shower chair. When I struggled with the stairs, he suggested I take my time, maybe use the guest bathroom downstairs instead of climbing up to the main one. "It's just temporary, Mom," he'd say with that familiar smile. "Until you're feeling stronger." I should have realized then how quickly temporary was becoming permanent, how, until you're stronger, was becoming, you're too weak. But I was still recovering, still grateful, still seeing everything through the lens of a mother's love for her devoted son. The financial changes started so subtly I barely noticed. David sat me down one evening about 6 months after I'd moved in, a folder of papers spread across the dining room table. "Mom, I've been thinking about your finances," he said, his tone serious but caring. "Managing bills from 2 households is getting complicated, and I'm worried you might accidentally miss something important. What if we simplified things? I could take over handling your accounts, make sure everything gets paid on time." It made sense. I'd been feeling overwhelmed by the paperwork, confused by the insurance forms and medical bills that seemed to multiply daily. David was good with numbers, he'd gotten his MBA, worked in corporate finance. Who better to trust than my own son? I signed the papers he put in front of me, making him power of attorney over my finances. He promised it was just to make things easier, just to help me during my recovery. He even joked about it. "Don't worry, Mom. I'm not going to spend your money on sports cars and vacations," he'd laughed, and I'd laughed with him. But within weeks, my credit cards were consolidated into one account that David monitored. My bank statement started going to his email instead of mine. When I wanted to buy something, even something as simple as a book or a new sweater, I found myself having to ask permission. "Mom, do you really need another mystery novel? You have dozens upstairs you haven't read yet," he'd say with that patient tone people use with children. The social changes were even more gradual. My weekly bridge club became too much driving for someone recovering from a hip injury. My longtime friendship with Linda became stressful because she asked too many questions about my living situation. Phone calls were monitored under the guise of making sure I wasn't being targeted by scammers. "You know how these con artists prey on seniors, Mom," David would say, checking the caller ID whenever my phone rang. "I'm just looking out for you." Each restriction came wrapped in love, in concern, in what seemed like reasonable caution. I was recovering, after all. I was getting older. Maybe I wasn't thinking as clearly as I used to. Maybe David was right to be protective. The medication management started about a year in. I'd accidentally taken my blood pressure pill twice one morning, a simple mistake anyone could make, but David treated it like a crisis. "What if it had been something more serious?" he asked, genuinely frightened. "What if you'd overdosed on your heart medication?" "Mom, I think it's time we set up a system." The system was a locked pill organizer that only David could open. Every morning, he'd portion out my medications, explaining that it was for my own safety. I had to ask him for everything: pain relievers, vitamins, even the antacids I sometimes needed after dinner. "It's just until we're sure you won't make any more mistakes," he assured me. But somehow, that day never came. The temporary measures became permanent fixtures, and I became less of a guest in David's home and more of a patient. A responsibility. A burden that needed managing. I didn't see it happening. That's the most frightening part. It crept up on me like fog rolling in, so gradual that by the time I realized I couldn't see clearly anymore, I was already lost. The first friend to disappear from my life was Eleanor. We'd taught together for 23 years, shared countless lunches in the faculty room, celebrated each other's milestones, and mourned each other's losses. She'd been calling every Tuesday evening since Harold died, a ritual that had become as comforting as breathing. "Mom, Eleanor called again," David said one evening, his tone carrying just a hint of exasperation. "That's 3 times this week. Doesn't she have anything better to do than bother you when you're trying to rest?" I looked up from the crossword puzzle I'd been struggling with, another thing that used to come easily but now left me feeling frustrated and slow. "She's not bothering me, honey. We've talked every Tuesday for 15 years. I know," he said, settling into the chair across from me with that patient expression I was beginning to recognize. "But think about it, Mom. You're exhausted by 7 o'clock most nights. You need your rest to heal properly. And Eleanor, well, she just talks and talks, doesn't she? About people you don't even see anymore, problems that aren't really your concern." There was truth in what he said. I had been feeling tired earlier in the evenings, and Eleanor did tend to go on about the neighborhood gossip and her complicated relationship with her daughter-in-law. But those conversations had been my lifeline to the world outside these walls, my connection to who I used to be. "Maybe you could just let her know you need some space while you're recovering," David suggested. "I could handle it if you want. Save you the awkward conversation." I should have said no. I should have recognized the manipulation, the way he was painting my oldest friend as an inconvenience rather than a support. But I was tired, and the thought of having to explain my situation to Eleanor, having to admit that I wasn't the independent woman she'd known, felt overwhelming. "I suppose that would be easier," I heard myself saying. David handled it, all right. When Eleanor called the following Tuesday, he answered and had a conversation I wasn't allowed to hear. After that, the Tuesday calls stopped. When I asked what he'd told her, David waved dismissively. "Just that you were focusing on your health right now and would reach out when you felt better." She understood completely. But something in his tone made me doubt that Eleanor had understood at all. I tried calling her back a few weeks later, but she seemed distant, hurt. Our conversation was stilted and brief, and when I hung up, I felt like I'd lost something precious I'd never get back. Margaret from down the street was next. She'd been stopping by every few weeks with her famous chocolate chip cookies and updates about the old neighborhood. David started answering the door when she came, having quiet conversations on the front step while I waited inside, wondering why I wasn't being invited to join them. "Margaret's worried about you," he told me after one such visit. "She thinks you've lost weight, that you seem different." I had to reassure her that you're just adjusting to a new living situation. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you're doing better than ever, that you're grateful to have family taking care of you instead of struggling alone in that big house." He paused, studying my face. "You are grateful, aren't you, Mom?" The question hung in the air like a trap. Of course I was grateful. David had taken me in, given up his office, rearranged his family's life for me. But Margaret's concern gnawed at me. Had I lost weight? Was I different? "Of course I'm grateful," I said, because it was what he needed to hear. Margaret's visits became less frequent, then stopped altogether. When I asked David about it, he shrugged. "I think she got the message that you're doing fine here. Sometimes people don't know when to step back and let a family heal." The bridge club was the hardest loss. For 12 years, every Thursday afternoon had been sacred, for hours of cards, conversation, and laughter with women who'd become like sisters to me. When I first moved in with David, I'd asked him to drive me to Ruth's house for our weekly game. "I don't think that's a good idea right now, Mom," he'd said. "You're still using a walker, you get tired easily, and honestly, I'm worried about you navigating Ruth's stairs. What if you fell again?" The fear he planted took root immediately. Ruth did have a steep front step, and I had been feeling unsteady lately. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was too risky. What if we had them here instead? I suggested. "Just until I'm steadier on my feet." David's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mom, Sarah, and I both work from home sometimes. The noise would be disruptive, and frankly, this house isn't set up for entertaining. Maybe it's time to take a break from the bridge club. Focus on your recovery." "Just temporarily," I agreed, but even as I said it, I knew it wouldn't be temporary. I called Ruth to explain, and her disappointment was palpable. "Margaret, honey, we could play at my kitchen table instead of upstairs. Or we could even play Go Fish if that's easier. We just miss you." But David was right there, listening to every word, and I found myself making excuses. "I'm just not feeling up to it right now. Maybe in a few months." The months passed. Ruth called a few more times, then stopped. I learned later from a chance encounter at the grocery store that they'd found a fourth player, Helen Morrison from the Methodist Church. They were doing fine without me. Each severed connection was justified, rationalized, presented as being in my best interest. David wasn't isolating me, he was protecting me. He wasn't controlling my social life, he was helping me prioritize my health. He wasn't cutting me off from my support system, he was streamlining my recovery. The most insidious part was how he made me complicit in my own isolation. He never forbade me from seeing people, he just made it clear that choosing my friends over his concerns would be selfish, ungrateful, potentially dangerous. He planted seeds of doubt about every relationship. Eleanor was draining, Margaret was gossipy, the bridge club was risky. By the end of my first year in David's house, my phone rarely rang. When it did, David would check the caller ID and often answer himself, explaining that I was resting or having a difficult day. Gradually, people stopped trying to reach me at all. I told myself I didn't mind the quiet. I convinced myself that I preferred the peace of family life to the chaos of maintaining friendships. But late at night, lying in what used to be David's office, I felt the weight of the silence pressing down on me like a physical thing. I was disappearing, one relationship at a time, until the only voices in my world belonged to David and his family. And even then, I was becoming more observer than participant, more ghost than family member. The isolation was complete, and I had helped him build every wall. The first time David commented on my eating, I thought he was being thoughtful. I just finished a second helping of Sarah's pot roast, the first meal in weeks that had actually tasted good to me, when he glanced at my empty plate with what seemed like gentle concern. "Mom, maybe you should slow down a bit," he said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of loving worry. "Dr. Patterson mentioned at your last appointment that you need to watch your weight. With your reduced mobility, you're not burning calories like you used to." I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment. Had I been eating too quickly? Too much? I tried to remember what Dr. Patterson had actually said about my weight, but the appointment was a blur of David translating my symptoms and speaking for me when I seemed to take too long to answer. "I suppose you're right," I said, pushing away the small portion I'd been considering for thirds. The pot roast had reminded me of Sunday dinners when David was little, when our table was full of laughter and Harold would joke about needing to loosen his belt. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. Within a week, David had taken over meal planning entirely. It started as a helpful gesture. Sarah was busy with the kids' schedules, and I'd been feeling overwhelmed by grocery shopping since my hip injury. David presented it as a solution that would benefit everyone. "I've been doing some research on nutrition for seniors," he announced one morning, placing a printed chart on the kitchen counter. "Did you know that people over 70 need significantly fewer calories than they think? Most elderly people overeat without realizing it, which leads to all sorts of health problems." The chart looked official, full of numbers and percentages that made my head spin. According to David's calculations, I needed only 1,200 calories per day, barely more than a toddler. When I questioned whether that seemed low, he showed me articles he'd printed from various websites, all highlighting the dangers of overeating in seniors. "Look at this, Mom," he said, pointing to a highlighted section. "Excessive calorie intake in elderly individuals can lead to diabetes, heart disease, and further mobility issues. We're trying to keep you healthy here." The science sounded convincing, and David seemed so knowledgeable, so caring. If he'd gone to the trouble of researching what was best for me, who was I to argue? I'd always trusted his intelligence, his education. Maybe I really had been eating too much without realizing it. The portion started shrinking immediately. Breakfast became half a piece of toast with a thin spread of jam. Lunch was a small salad or a cup of soup, never both. Dinner was a palm-sized portion of protein, a spoonful of vegetables, and maybe a small scoop of starch if David decided I'd been good about my portions during the day. Meanwhile, the rest of the family ate normally. I watched David pile his plate high with second helpings while I carefully rationed my meager portions to last through the entire meal. The teenagers ate freely, often grabbing snacks between meals that contained more calories than my entire daily allowance. "It's different for them," David explained when I hesitantly pointed out the disparity. "They're growing, they're active. You're in a recovery phase where your body needs less fuel to function properly." But my body didn't feel like it was functioning properly. Within a month, I was constantly tired. My hands shook when I tried to write, and I felt dizzy whenever I stood up too quickly. I mentioned these symptoms to David, hoping he might reconsider the meal plan. "Those are normal signs of healing," he assured me. "Your body is learning to operate more efficiently. The weakness will pass once you adjust to eating the right amount." The kitchen became off-limits to me except under supervision. David installed a new lock on the pantry, claiming it was to keep the teenagers from raiding the snacks before dinner. But I noticed I was the only one who needed permission to open it. "Mom, I found cracker crumbs in your room," David said one morning, his tone disappointed rather than angry. "I thought we agreed you were going to stick to the meal plan." The shame burned in my chest. I had taken a few saltines from the pantry the night before, driven by hunger so intense it kept me awake. The portion at dinner had been smaller than usual, David said I'd seemed less active that day, and by bedtime, my stomach was cramping with emptiness. I was just so hungry, I whispered, feeling like a child caught stealing cookies. I know it's hard, David said, his voice softening into that patronizing gentleness I'd grown to dread. But this is about discipline, Mom. About taking control of your health instead of letting your impulses control you. He moved the crackers to a higher shelf that I couldn't reach without a stepladder, the same stepladder that had caused my fall 2 years earlier. The message was clear. Snacks became rewards for good behavior. If I took my medications without complaint, finished my physical therapy exercises, or didn't ask to call friends, David might allow me an apple or a small piece of cheese. If I seemed difficult or ungrateful, even these small treats were withheld. Food is fuel, not entertainment, he would say when I expressed longing for something sweet or satisfying. You're eating to live, not living to eat. But I wasn't living at all. I was surviving, and barely that. My clothes hung loose on my shrinking frame, and I caught glimpses of myself in mirrors with growing alarm. My face looked gaunt, my eyes hollow. I'd lost 25 pounds in 6 months, and when I mentioned this to David, he actually smiled. See? The plan is working. You look healthier already. I didn't feel healthier. I felt like I was disappearing, one meal at a time. The worst part was how David made my hunger seem like a character flaw, my need for nourishment a sign of weakness or greed. He'd turned something as basic as eating into a moral failing. Every bite became calculated, every meal a test I was constantly failing. And when I finally gathered the courage to ask for more food that terrible night 3 months ago, when my body was crying out for sustenance and I could barely think straight from hunger, David's response revealed what he'd really been doing all along. I wasn't being helped. I was being starved. Not quickly, not obviously, but slowly and systematically, until I was too weak to fight back, too grateful for scraps to demand better treatment. Food had become his weapon, and hunger had become my prison. The day everything changed started like any other day in my carefully controlled world. I woke up dizzy, as I had every morning for months, and lay in bed for several minutes waiting for the room to stop spinning. My stomach was already cramping with hunger, a sensation I'd learned to accept as normal, even though every instinct in my body screamed that something was terribly wrong. David knocked on my door at exactly 7:30, as he did every morning, carrying my portioned breakfast on a small tray. Half a piece of toast, lightly buttered, with a glass of water and my morning medications lined up in a precise row. "Good morning, Mom," he said with that bright, false cheerfulness that had replaced his genuine warmth somewhere along the way. "How are we feeling today?" We. As if my body belonged to both of us, as if my hunger was a shared experience rather than my private torment. "I'm fine," I lied, because admitting weakness only led to lectures about my attitude and gratitude. I ate the toast slowly, trying to make it last, trying to convince my stomach that this tiny portion would somehow be enough. But by noon, I was shaking. Not the gentle tremor that had become constant since the food restrictions began, but violent shaking that made it impossible to hold a book or work on a crossword puzzle. When I tried to stand to use the bathroom, my vision went black around the edges, and I had to grip the doorframe to keep from falling. I hadn't eaten lunch. There had been no lunch. David had gotten an important conference call that ran long, and in his absence, I didn't dare venture into the kitchen alone. The rules were clear: I ate only what David gave me, only when he gave it to me. Taking food without permission had consequences I'd learned to fear. By 4 o'clock, I was desperate enough to break the rules. I made my way slowly to the kitchen, gripping the wall for support, and opened the refrigerator with trembling hands. There were leftovers from the family's lunch, sandwiches, fruit, a container of Sarah's homemade soup. My mouth watered at the sight, and I reached for an apple with the guilty urgency of an addict reaching for a fix. "What are you doing?" David's voice behind me made me jump so violently that I nearly dropped the apple. I turned to face him, my heart pounding, feeling like a criminal caught in the act. I missed lunch, and I'm feeling a bit faint, I stammered, holding the apple like evidence of my crime. His expression darkened immediately. You know the rules, Mom. We've talked about this. You eat what I give you, when I give it to you. Your body doesn't need random snacking, it needs discipline. But David, I haven't eaten since breakfast. It's been 9 hours, and you what? You think you know better than the nutritional plan we've carefully designed for your health. His voice was rising, and I could see Sarah in the doorway now, watching with an expression I couldn't read. Do you have any idea how much time and research I've put into making sure you get exactly what you need? I put the apple back in the refrigerator with shaking hands, but the hunger was making me bold, or maybe just desperate. I understand that you're trying to help, sweetheart, but I think maybe the portions are too small. I'm losing too much weight, and I feel weak all the time. The silence that followed was deafening. David stared at me for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. Are you questioning my judgment? No, I'm just. Because it sounds like you're questioning my judgment. After everything I've sacrificed for you. After taking you into my home, managing your medications, handling your finances, making sure you don't hurt yourself again. Each word was like a slap. And this is how you show your gratitude. By sneaking around, breaking the rules, and then having the audacity to criticize the care I'm providing. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that I wasn't being ungrateful, just hungry. But the words died in my throat under his withering stare. This wasn't my son anymore. This was a stranger wearing David's face, speaking with David's voice, but with eyes as cold as winter. Dinner that evening was a minefield of tension. The family ate in relative silence while I picked at my small portion, smaller than usual, I noticed, perhaps as punishment for my earlier transgression. The meatloaf was perfectly seasoned, the mashed potatoes creamy and rich, the green beans crisp and buttered. My mouth watered with each small bite, and I found myself eating slower and slower, trying to make the meager portion last. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. My stomach was still cramping with hunger when everyone else had finished their generous servings, and something inside me, some vestige of the strong woman I used to be, finally rebelled. I looked at David, at this man who had systematically stripped away my independence, my friendships, my dignity, and now my basic need for nourishment, and I found my voice. David, honey, could I have just a little more? I'm still quite hungry. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah stopped chewing. The teenagers looked up from their phones. And David's face transformed into something I didn't recognize, something cruel and calculating that made my blood run cold. What followed was not a conversation between a mother and son. It was a master reminding a servant of their place. David stood up, his chair scraping against the floor like fingernails on a chalkboard, and the look in his eyes was pure contempt. Are you serious right now? His voice was low but vibrating with rage. After everything I do for you. I pay for this house, I pay for your medications, I drive you to your appointments, I cook your meals, and you have the audacity to complain that it's not enough? I'm not complaining, I whispered, my voice getting smaller with each word. I'm just. Just what? Ungrateful. Manipulative. He was leaning over me now, his face inches from mine. Do you have any idea what it costs to support you? What I've given up? The sacrifices Sarah and I have made? Each word was a physical blow. I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller under his assault. The meatloaf on my plate might as well have been ash in my mouth. Then came the words that would haunt every meal for the rest of my life. You're lucky I don't let you starve. This is my house now, and you eat what I allow. The physical reaction was immediate and overwhelming. My stomach clenched with nausea so intense I thought I might vomit right there at the dinner table. My hands began to tremble uncontrollably, not from hunger this time, but from shock so profound it felt like my entire nervous system was shutting down. I couldn't eat another bite. The food I'd been desperately craving moments before became impossible to swallow. My throat closed up, and every instinct in my body screamed that I was in danger. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, David's words echoing in my mind like a curse. "You're lucky I don't let you starve." As if my basic need for food was a privilege he could revoke at will. As if my life was something he owned, something he could control down to the very last calorie. I realized then that I wasn't living in my son's house as a beloved family member. I was existing as a prisoner, sustained only by my captor's whims, grateful for scraps because I'd been convinced I deserved nothing more. And the most terrifying part was how completely I'd accepted it. The mirror doesn't lie, even when I wish it would. Standing in the bathroom after my weekly shower, another supervised activity now, for safety reasons, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My face is gaunt, cheekbones sharp enough to cast shadows under the harsh fluorescent light. My eyes have sunk deep into their sockets, circled with dark rings that makeup can't hide, not that I have the energy to try anymore. But it's my body that shocks me most. My collarbones jut out like shelves, and my shoulders have become bony angles where soft curves used to be. The nightgown that used to fit snugly now hangs on me like a tent, the fabric pooling around my diminished frame. I've lost 30 pounds in 8 months, though David insists it's only 25 and that I'm finally at a healthy weight for someone my age. The tremor in my hands has become constant now. I watch my fingers shake as I try to brush my thinning hair, each strand seeming more fragile than the last. What was once a full head of silver waves has become sparse and brittle, falling out in clumps that I hide in tissues before David can see and blame it on some imaginary medical condition. Getting dressed has become an ordeal. The simple act of lifting my arms to put on a sweater leaves me breathless and dizzy. I have to sit on the edge of the bed between each step, waiting for my vision to clear, for my heart to stop racing from the minimal exertion. Tasks that were automatic just months ago, buttoning shirts, pulling on socks, fastening jewelry, now require rest breaks and careful planning. The stairs are my enemy. Each step up feels like climbing a mountain, my legs shaking with the effort, my grip white-knuckled on the handrail. I've started avoiding the upstairs bathroom entirely, using the powder room on the main floor instead, even though it means asking permission to use the guest bathroom in what David constantly reminds me is his house. "You seem to be having trouble with mobility again, Mom," David observed last week, watching me struggle to rise from the dinner table. "Maybe we should consider getting you one of those motorized chairs. You know, the kind that lifts you up automatically." The suggestion felt like another step toward complete helplessness, another way to make me dependent on his charity. I declined, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was already planning my next accommodation, my next limitation. Sleep has become elusive. The hunger keeps me awake, gnawing at my insides like a living thing. I lie in bed listening to my stomach growl, the sound embarrassingly loud in the quiet house. When I finally do drift off, I dream of food, elaborate banquets where I can eat freely, grocery stores where I can choose anything I want, simple meals from my childhood when food was comfort, not punishment. I wake up more tired than when I went to sleep, my body aching in ways it never did before. My joints feel stiff and painful, and I catch myself moving like an old woman, really old, not just elderly. I shuffle instead of walk, lower myself carefully into chairs, and grip surfaces for balance even when I don't think I need to. The worst part is how my mind has begun to betray me too. Simple conversations leave me confused and struggling for words. Yesterday, I couldn't remember my own sister's maiden name when Sarah asked about family history. I found myself staring at the crossword puzzle for 20 minutes, unable to recall a 5-letter word for garden tool that I've known my entire adult life. "It's perfectly normal for cognitive function to decline with age," David explained when I mentioned my memory concerns. The brain needs proper nutrition to function optimally, but it also needs to learn to work more efficiently. Less input, more focused output. His explanation sounded scientific, reasonable, but something about it felt wrong. My mind had been sharp just months ago. I'd been reading complex novels, managing my own finances, having deep conversations with friends. Now I struggle to follow the plot of a television show or remember what day of the week it is. During my last doctor's appointment, my first in 6 months, and David came with me, of course, Dr. Patterson frowned as she reviewed my chart. "Margaret, you've lost quite a bit of weight since your last visit," she said, her voice concerned. "Are you eating well? Any changes in appetite?" I opened my mouth to explain, to tell her about the constant hunger, the restricted portions, the way food had become a weapon in my own home. But David was right there, his hand on my shoulder in what looked like comfort but felt like a warning. "She's been on a supervised nutrition plan," he interjected smoothly. "We've been working hard to get her weight into a healthier range. She was quite overweight after her injury, very sedentary, you know." Dr. Patterson looked at me questioningly, but with David's steady presence beside me, I found myself nodding along. "Yes, I've been trying to eat better." "Well, 30 pounds is quite a bit," she said, still frowning. "How do you feel? Any weakness, dizziness, fatigue?" Again, I started to answer honestly, but David's hand tightened on my shoulder. "She's adjusting well," he said. "Much more energy now that she's not carrying extra weight." "Aren't you, Mom?" "Yes," I whispered, hating myself for the lie. "Much better." But I wasn't better. I was disappearing, piece by piece, pound by pound. My clothes hung loose, my rings slipped off my fingers, and my wedding band, the one constant in my life for 47 years, now spun freely on my shrunken finger. The physical weakness affects everything. I can't open jars anymore, can't lift the laundry basket, can't even push the vacuum cleaner across the carpet. Each limitation becomes another reason for David to take over another aspect of my care, another freedom surrendered in the name of my safety. "You're just not strong enough for that anymore, Mom," has become his constant refrain. "Let me handle it." So I sit. I wait. I accept help for things I should be able to do myself, and I pretend not to notice how my dependence seems to satisfy something dark in David's eyes. Each pound I lose, each task I can no longer perform, each moment of confusion or weakness, they all serve his purpose, proving to the world and to me that I truly do need him to survive. The cruelest irony is that he's right, in a way. I do need him now. The systematic starvation has made me too weak to care for myself, too confused to make plans, too isolated to ask for help. My body has become the prison he's built around me, and I'm too malnourished to find the key. Sometimes I catch glimpses of my reflection in windows and don't recognize the frail woman looking back. She looks like someone who's given up, someone who's accepted defeat. The most terrifying part is that sometimes, I think she has. Maybe my memories of being strong and independent were just fantasies created by a mind trying to avoid accepting its own decline. The worst part was that sometimes, I almost hoped that was true. Because if I really was losing my mind, then at least the nightmare had an explanation that didn't involve my own son systematically destroying my sense of reality for his own twisted purposes. At least madness would be kinder than the truth. Dinner has become a theater of cruelty where I play the starring role without ever speaking a line. Every evening at 6 o'clock sharp, we gather around the mahogany dining table that used to represent warmth and family togetherness. Now it feels like a courtroom where I'm perpetually on trial, and the evidence of my guilt sits right there on my plate, or rather, what little of it David allows me to have. Tonight, like every night, I take my designated seat at the far end of the table, as far from the kitchen as possible. It's a subtle but deliberate placement that ensures I can't see what's being served until my portion is already decided. The family fills their plates with generous helpings while I wait, hands folded in my lap like a child, for David to present me with whatever he deems appropriate. Here you go, Mom, he says with that false brightness that makes my skin crawl, placing a plate in front of me that looks like it belongs in a pediatric hospital. A slice of roast beef no bigger than a credit card, 3 spoonfuls of mashed potatoes, and exactly 6 green beans counted out like precious jewels. Meanwhile, 16-year-old Jake loads his plate with seconds before he's even finished firsts. 14-year-old Emma asks for extra bread, and Sarah laughs as she adds another dollop of gravy to her already generous portion. The contrast is so stark it's almost comical, if comedy weren't the furthest thing from what this has become. I pick up my fork and take the first bite, and immediately David's words from 3 months ago flood my consciousness. You're lucky I don't let you starve. The roast beef turns to sawdust in my mouth. My stomach, already cramping with hunger before the meal even began, clenches with the memory of his contempt. Every bite becomes an act of swallowing shame along with sustenance. The conversation flows around me like I'm a piece of furniture. Jake talks about his football practice, Emma complains about her algebra teacher, Sarah discusses her book club's latest selection. David responds to each of them with genuine interest, asking follow-up questions, sharing opinions, laughing at their jokes. They are a family, complete and whole, while I am a ghost haunting the edges of their happiness. Pass the potatoes, please, Emma says, and the bowl makes its way around the table, stopping at each person except me. No one asks if I want more. No one even glances at my nearly empty plate. I've become so thoroughly trained not to ask for additional food that the family has learned to pretend I don't exist during mealtimes. I watch Jake take his third helping of potatoes while I carefully ration my 3 spoonfuls to last through the entire meal. I watch Sarah butter her second roll while I haven't been given even one. The inequity is so obvious, so cruel, that I wonder how they can all participate in it so casually. But then I remember, they don't see it as cruelty. David has convinced them, as he's convinced me, that this is medical necessity. That I'm on a special diet for my health. That my hunger is my body learning to be more efficient. The silence around my situation is deafening. When I occasionally make a small sound, a barely audible stomach growl, an involuntary sigh when the portion feels particularly meager, David's eyes snap to me like a warning. The message is clear. Even the sounds of my hunger are inappropriate, selfish, disruptive to the family's peace. This roast is delicious, honey, Sarah tells David, cutting into her generous portion. Where did you get it? That new butcher shop on Maple Street, David replies, beaming with pride. I asked for their best cut. Nothing's too good for my family. My family. The words sting because I know they don't include me anymore. I'm not family, I'm a responsibility, a burden, a mouth to feed as sparingly as possible while maintaining the pretense of care. Jake asks for seconds on the roast beef, and David happily obliges, carving off a piece twice the size of my original portion. I try not to watch, but my eyes are drawn to the abundance on everyone else's plates like a moth to flame. The green beans look so perfectly seasoned, the potatoes so creamy and rich. My mouth waters watching them eat, and I hate myself for it. Grandma, you're not eating much, Emma observes suddenly, and the table falls silent. My heart stops. Someone has noticed. Someone has finally seen that something is wrong. But before I can respond, David smoothly intervenes. Your grandmother is being very disciplined about her portions. She's working hard to maintain a healthy weight, aren't you, Mom? All eyes turn to me, and I feel the familiar weight of expected compliance. I'm supposed to smile and agree, to play my part in this charade of willing participation in my own starvation. Yes, I whisper, the lie tasting more bitter than hunger itself. I'm trying to be more careful about what I eat. Emma nods approvingly, and the conversation moves on. The moment of potential rescue passes like a shadow, leaving me more isolated than before. Even my own granddaughter, who loves me, accepts the narrative that my suffering is actually self-improvement. As the meal progresses, I develop strategies to make it last longer. I chew each bite slowly, thoroughly, trying to extract every possible moment of satisfaction from the meager portion. I put my fork down between bites, take sips of water to fill the empty spaces, cut the small pieces of meat into even smaller pieces to create the illusion of abundance. But no matter how carefully I pace myself, my plate is always empty first. Then I sit there, stomach still growling with hunger, watching the family finish their generous portions while David's voice echoes in my head. "You're lucky I don't let you starve." The phrase has become my dinner companion, more constant than any family member. It sits beside me like a malevolent presence, whispering reminders of my place in this hierarchy. I'm not entitled to satisfaction, to fullness, to the simple human pleasure of eating until I'm no longer hungry. I'm entitled only to what David allows, and I should be grateful for that meager gift. When everyone else has finished, I excuse myself from the table and retreat to my room, where I lie on my bed and listen to my stomach continue its protests. Sometimes I press my hands against my abdomen, trying to quiet the sound, afraid that David might hear it and interpret it as ingratitude. Through the walls, I can hear the family's evening routine continuing, dishes clattering as they're cleaned, television shows beginning, normal conversations about normal things. Life goes on around me while I remain frozen in this liminal space between family member and prisoner, between being fed and being starved, between existing and disappearing entirely. The cruelest part is how normal it's all become. How thoroughly I've been trained to accept this theater of deprivation, to play my role as the grateful patient who eats what she's given and asks for nothing more. The silent meals have become my education in powerlessness, teaching me daily that my needs don't matter, my hunger doesn't count, and my voice has no place at this table. Even now, hours later, I can still hear David's words echoing with every empty rumble of my stomach. "You're lucky I don't let you starve." And the most terrifying part is that I'm starting to believe him. The crackers are stale, but they taste like salvation. I sit on the edge of my bed at 2 in the morning, eating them one tiny piece at a time, savoring each crumb like it's caviar. My hands shake as I break off another fragment, not from weakness this time, but from the terror of being caught. Every small sound seems amplified in the darkness, the rustle of the plastic sleeve, the soft crunch between my teeth, even my own breathing feels dangerously loud. I've become a thief in the night, sneaking food like a criminal in what was once my own home. The shame burns in my chest, but hunger burns deeper. It's been 6 hours since my meager dinner portion, and my stomach cramps with such intensity that I've given up trying to sleep. The pain radiates through my entire abdomen, a constant reminder that my body is consuming itself in the absence of adequate nourishment. These crackers represent 30 minutes of careful planning. I had to wait until I heard David and Sarah's bedroom door close, then another hour for the house to settle into the deep quiet that means everyone is truly asleep. I counted David's snores through the wall. He's always been a heavy sleeper, thank God, before I dared to creep down the hallway on bare feet, avoiding the squeaky board near the bathroom that I've memorized through necessity. The pantry lock clicks so softly I barely hear it myself, but to my guilty ears it sounds like a gunshot. David installed that lock 6 months ago, claiming it was to keep the teenagers from late-night snacking, but I know the truth. It's to keep me from accessing food without permission, to ensure that every calorie I consume is measured and controlled. I know where he hides the key, taped under the lip of the kitchen counter, just out of my reach when I'm using my walker. But desperation has made me resourceful. I've learned to grip the counter edge and stretch, my arthritic fingers fumbling in the darkness until they find that small piece of metal that represents the difference between hunger and survival. The sleeve of saltines sits in the back corner behind cans of vegetables I'm no longer allowed to eat. My portion-controlled diet doesn't include canned corn or green beans, too many carbohydrates, according to David's nutritional research. I take exactly 4 crackers, no more, hoping the missing food won't be noticed among the abundance that everyone else in this house takes for granted. Back in my room, I eat them so slowly that each one lasts 10 minutes. I let the salt dissolve on my tongue, feeling my body absorb the tiny bit of sustenance like a desert drinking rain. It's pathetic, this gratitude for stale crackers, but pathetic has become my normal state. The water bottle hidden in my dresser drawer is another act of rebellion. David monitors my fluid intake too, claiming that elderly people often drink too much water and upset their electrolyte balance. But water is the only thing that quiets the constant gnawing in my stomach, the only way I can create even the illusion of fullness. I drink it warm and in small sips, trying to make it last through the night. Sometimes I imagine it's soup, vegetable soup like Harold used to make on Sunday afternoons, rich with tomatoes and herbs from our garden. The fantasy is so vivid I can almost taste the difference, and for a moment, my stomach stops its incessant complaining. During the day, I've learned to hoard in plain sight. A dinner roll saved, for later, and tucked into my napkin. A piece of fruit claimed but then, forgotten, in my cardigan pocket. Crumbs from Jake's after-school snacks that I sweep into my palm when no one is looking. Each morsel is precious, rationed out over hours like medicine. The hoarding has made me paranoid and calculating. I study the family's routines, memorizing when Sarah goes grocery shopping, when David checks the pantry inventory, when the teenagers are distracted by homework or video games. I've become a spy in my own home, gathering intelligence about food the way prisoners of war gather information about their captors. My dresser drawer has become a pathetic cache of survival supplies, packets of crackers from restaurants we visited months ago, sugar packets saved from coffee shops, even a granola bar that Emma left on the kitchen counter and forgot about. I ration these treasures like they're gold, eating one small piece when the hunger becomes unbearable, always careful to save something for tomorrow's desperation. The guilt is almost as consuming as the hunger. I lie awake after these midnight raids, staring at the ceiling and hating myself for what I've become. A woman who steals crackers from her own family. A mother who sneaks around like a child, grateful for scraps and terrified of discovery. The shame coats everything, making even the stolen food taste bitter. But worse than the guilt is the fear of being caught. I imagine David's reaction if he finds my hidden stash, his disappointed lectures about trust and gratitude and medical compliance. I picture him installing more locks, more monitoring, more restrictions designed to keep me safe from my own dangerous impulses. Margaret, we found food in your room again, becomes the nightmare scenario that haunts my guilty conscience. We've talked about this. You know the rules. You eat what's on your meal plan, nothing more, nothing less. This sneaking around is exactly the kind of confused behavior that proves you need more supervision. The worst part is how reasonable his hypothetical anger sounds, even in my own imagination. I have been sneaking. I have been breaking the rules. I have been undermining the carefully controlled nutritional plan that he claims is keeping me healthy. My desperation doesn't feel like survival, it feels like selfishness, like the actions of an ungrateful, demanding old woman who can't accept the care being provided for her. Sometimes I catch myself mid-bite and stop, wondering if David is right. Maybe I am eating too much. Maybe my body really doesn't need the calories I crave. Maybe the hunger that feels so urgent and real is actually just habit, greed, the inability to accept that my needs have changed as I've aged. But then my stomach cramps again, and I remember the way my clothes hang loose, the way my ribs show through my nightgown, the way I can wrap my fingers around my wrist with room to spare. This isn't healthy weight loss, this is starvation dressed up as medical care. I finish the last cracker crumb and hide the empty sleeve in the bottom of my trash basket, covering it with tissues and yesterday's medication packaging. Tomorrow I'll have to be more careful, more creative. Maybe I can save a spoonful of oatmeal from breakfast, or slip an apple slice into my pocket during lunch preparation. The planning exhausts me, but it also gives me purpose. For a few hours each day, I'm not just David's dependent mother, weak and confused and grateful for whatever scraps of care I'm given. I'm a woman fighting for survival, using whatever small power I still possess to keep myself alive. Even if that power only extends to stealing crackers in the middle of the night, it's something. It's proof that somewhere deep inside, the woman I used to be is still fighting. Even if she's losing. The doorbell rings at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, cutting through the suffocating quiet of the house like a lifeline I didn't know I was drowning without. I'm sitting in my designated chair by the window, pretending to read a book whose words have been swimming meaninglessly across the page for the past hour. My stomach is making its familiar complaints. Lunch was a cup of broth and 3 crackers, but I've learned to tune out its protests the way you learn to ignore a chronic headache. Through the sheer curtains, I see a familiar figure on the front porch, and my heart nearly stops. Linda Morrison stands there in her bright red coat, holding a casserole dish and looking exactly like the friend I remember from our teaching days, confident, warm, beautifully alive in a way I'd forgotten people could be. "I'll get it," David calls from his home office, and I hear his footsteps approaching the front door with that measured pace that always makes me nervous. He's been working from home more often lately, which means more supervision, more monitoring, more opportunities for him to remind me of the rules that govern my existence. I strain to hear their conversation through the door, catching fragments that make my chest tight with longing. Linda's voice, bright and familiar, asking about me. David's responses, smooth and controlled, explaining that I'm doing well, but resting more these days. I want to call out, to let her know I'm right here, that I can speak for myself, but something holds me back, some learned helplessness that David has cultivated so carefully over these past 2 years. After what feels like an eternity, David appears in the living room with Linda behind him, and I watch her face change the moment she sees me. The casual smile falters, replaced by something I haven't seen in so long I almost don't recognize it, genuine concern for my well-being. "Margaret," she breathes, and in that single word I hear shock, worry, and a recognition that something is terribly wrong. "My goodness, you look. She's lost some weight," David interrupts smoothly, settling into the chair across from us with the proprietary air of a caregiver. "We've been working with her doctor on a nutrition plan. She's much healthier now, aren't you, Mom?" I nod automatically, the response so practiced it requires no thought. But Linda's eyes never leave my face, and I can see her cataloging the changes, my hollow cheeks, my too large clothes, the way my wedding ring slides loose on my shrunken finger. Her expression grows more troubled with each detail she takes in. "How are you feeling, Margaret?" she asks directly, pointedly ignoring David's attempt to answer for me. "Really? How are you?" The simple question hits me like a physical blow. When was the last time someone asked about my feelings, my experience, my thoughts? When was the last time someone looked at me as if my answer actually mattered? I begin, then falter. The honest words, "I'm hungry, I'm scared, I'm disappearing," stick in my throat. Instead, I hear myself saying, "I'm fine. David takes very good care of me." But something in my voice must betray me, because Linda leans forward slightly, her eyes searching my face with the intensity of someone reading between the lines. "I brought you that King Ranch chicken casserole you always loved," she says, holding up the dish. "Remember how we used to make it for the faculty potlucks? You said it was your comfort food." The memory hits me so hard I almost gasp. Standing in the school kitchen with Linda, laughing as we doubled the recipe to feed 30 teachers, sneaking tastes when we thought no one was looking. Food as joy, as community, as love, not as punishment or control. "That's very thoughtful," David says before I can respond, "but Mom's on a pretty strict dietary regimen right now. Her doctor has her watching portion sizes very carefully. Maybe you could take it to someone who could really enjoy it." The dismissal is so casual, so practiced, that I wonder how many other offerings of kindness he's deflected over the months. How many people have tried to reach me, only to be turned away by David's helpful explanations about my special needs. But Linda doesn't back down. "Well, surely one small serving wouldn't hurt. It's been months since Margaret and I have had a proper visit." "I really don't think," David begins, but Linda cuts him off with the authority of a woman who spent 30 years managing classroom dynamics. "David, honey, would you mind getting us some tea? Margaret and I have some catching up to do." It's phrased as a request, but delivered with the kind of gentle firmness that brooks no argument. David hesitates, clearly reluctant to leave us alone, but social conventions trap him. He can't refuse without seeming rude or controlling, though that's exactly what he is. Of course, he says finally, but I catch the warning look he shoots me before heading to the kitchen. Behave. Don't embarrass me. Remember who takes care of you. The moment he's gone, Linda moves closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Margaret, I'm worried about you. You've lost so much weight, and you seem different. Are you eating enough? Are you okay here? The questions hang in the air like lifelines thrown to a drowning woman. For a moment, I'm paralyzed by the possibility of telling the truth, of letting someone else see the nightmare my life has become. But fear holds me back, fear of David's reaction, fear of being wrong about my own situation, fear that Linda won't believe me or won't be able to help. I'm eating fine, I whisper, but even I can hear how unconvincing it sounds. David manages my meals to keep me healthy. Linda's expression grows more troubled. Manages your meals. Margaret, you're a grown woman. You should be able to decide what and when you eat. The statement is so simple, so obvious, yet it hits me like a revelation. I should be able to decide what I eat. That's what normal people do. They feel hungry, they get food, they eat until they're satisfied. When did that become impossible for me? When did I start accepting that someone else had the right to ration my basic sustenance? It's complicated, I say weakly, but Linda shakes her head. No, honey, it's not complicated. You're clearly undernourished, and that's not okay. Has David talked to your doctor about this weight loss? Have you been evaluated for depression or other issues that might affect your appetite? Each question pierces through the fog of confusion and gaslighting that David has wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. Have I been evaluated? Have my symptoms been properly addressed? Or has David simply presented his version of my health to medical professionals while I sat silently beside him, too well trained to contradict his narrative? I hear David's footsteps returning from the kitchen, and the moment of potential honesty slips away like water through my fingers. But something has shifted inside me, a tiny crack in the wall of acceptance that David has built around my circumstances. As Linda accepts her tea and makes polite conversation with David about neighborhood news, I watch her face. I see the way she glances at me with continued concern, the way she doesn't quite buy David's explanations about my improved health, the way she keeps trying to include me in the conversation despite his attempts to dominate it. When she finally leaves, pressing my hand gently and making me promise to call her soon, I feel something I haven't experienced in months, the knowledge that someone else has seen my situation and recognized that something is wrong. That night, staring at the ceiling in my converted bedroom, I replay every moment of Linda's visit. Her shock at my appearance, her direct questions about my well-being, her insistence that I should be able to make my own food choices. For the first time in months, I wonder if the problem isn't my confusion or ingratitude or medical needs. Maybe the problem is David. And maybe, just maybe, it's not too late to remember who I used to be before I became his prisoner. The woman in the faded photograph on my dresser stares back at me with eyes I barely recognize. She's standing in front of a classroom, chalk dust on her navy blazer, surrounded by grinning third graders who clearly adore her. Her smile is confident, warm, and completely unafraid. I pick up the frame with trembling fingers, studying this stranger who used to be me. Margaret Chen, age 58. Master's degree in education. 31 years in the classroom. Widow who raised a son alone after her husband's sudden heart attack. Woman who never backed down from a challenge, who fought the school board for better resources, who once faced down an angry parent 3 times her size because she refused to change a failing grade his child had earned. That woman would never have accepted scraps for dinner. That woman would never have apologized for being hungry. That woman would have seen through David's manipulation in a heartbeat and called him out with the same authority she used to silence chattering students with a single look. What happened to her? Linda's visit 3 days ago cracked something open inside me, and now memories pour through like light through a broken dam. I remember the principal telling me during my retirement party that I was the backbone of this school. I remember parents thanking me for seeing potential in their children that no one else had recognized. I remember David himself, at age 12, telling his friends that his mom was the smartest person in the world, and meaning every word. When did I become so small? When did I accept that my voice didn't matter, that my needs were secondary, that my survival depended entirely on someone else's generosity? I set the photograph back on the dresser and walked to the mirror, forcing myself to really look at the woman reflecting back. Yes, I'm thinner, dangerously so. Yes, my clothes hang loose and my face is gaunt. But underneath the physical changes, behind the haunted eyes and hollow cheeks, I can see traces of who I used to be. The set of my jaw. The intelligence that David hasn't managed to starve out of me, no matter how hard he's tried. You should be able to decide what and when you eat. Linda's words echo in my mind with the force of truth. Such a simple statement, yet it cuts through months of David's complex explanations about nutrition and medical necessity. I am a 72-year-old woman with a minor mobility issue from a hip injury. There is absolutely no medical reason why I shouldn't be able to make my own food choices. The realization hits me like a physical blow. I have been systematically abused. Not helped. Not protected. Not given medical care. Abused. The word feels foreign in my mouth when I whisper it aloud in the empty room. Abuse is what happens to other people, women in shelters, children with bruises, strangers whose stories make the evening news. It's not what happens to retired teachers living with their successful sons in comfortable suburban homes. But as I catalog the evidence with the analytical mind that once graded thousands of essays, the truth becomes undeniable. The isolation from friends. The financial control. The food restrictions. The gaslighting that made me question my own memories and perceptions. The systematic destruction of my independence and self-worth. David didn't just control what I ate, he controlled who I saw, where I went, what I remembered, how I understood my own reality. He turned my gratitude into a weapon against myself, my love for him into chains that bound me to accept whatever treatment he chose to give. And I let him. God help me, I participated in my own destruction because I was so desperate to be the grateful, compliant mother he wanted me to be. But I am not that woman anymore. Or rather, I am not only that woman. I am also the teacher who never let a bully get away with tormenting a smaller child. I am the mother who worked 2 jobs to put David through college. I am the widow who learned to change her own oil and fix her own plumbing because no one else was going to do it for her. That woman is still here, buried under months of conditioning and malnutrition, but alive. And she is furious. The anger starts as a small flame in my chest and grows with each memory I reclaim. I remember teaching lessons about personal rights and dignity. I remember telling my students that no one had the right to hurt them, no matter who that person was or how much they claimed to love them. I remember meaning every word of those lessons. How can I have taught children to stand up for themselves while I cowed before my own son like a beaten animal? I walk to my closet and pull out the navy blazer from the photograph, the one I wore on my last day of teaching, when the entire school threw me a retirement party. It hangs loose on my diminished frame, but when I put it on and look in the mirror, I see a glimpse of my former self. You are Margaret Chen, I tell my reflection, and my voice is stronger than it's been in months. You have a master's degree. You raised a good man, or thought you did. You survived your husband's death. You rebuilt your life from nothing. You are not a victim. The words feel like an incantation, calling back pieces of my soul that I thought David had destroyed forever. I think about Linda's concerned face, the way she looked at me like I mattered, like my well-being was important simply because I was a human being deserving of care. When was the last time David looked at me that way? When was the last time he asked about my feelings, my thoughts, my dreams, rather than lecturing me about my limitations and failures? The answer is chilling, never. Not once since I moved into his house has he treated me like a person rather than a problem to be managed. I sit down at the small desk in the corner of my room, the one David grudgingly provided when I said I wanted to continue journaling, and pull out a sheet of paper. My hand shakes as I begin to write, but the words come with surprising clarity. My name is Margaret Chen. I am 72 years old. I am being systematically starved and psychologically abused by my son. I need help. The black ink on white paper makes it real in a way that thoughts alone couldn't. This is not confusion or ingratitude or medical necessity. This is abuse, and I am the victim. But I am also the survivor. I fold the paper carefully and hide it in the back of my jewelry box, behind the pearls Harold gave me for our 20th anniversary. It's not a plan yet, just a declaration. But it's a start. For the first time in months, when I lie down to sleep, it's not with the defeated exhaustion of someone waiting to die. It's with the determined weariness of someone preparing to fight. Tomorrow, I will begin to reclaim my life. I don't know how yet, but I know this: the woman who spent 31 years shaping young minds and fighting for what was right didn't disappear just because she got older and needed a hip replacement. She's been sleeping, but Linda's visit woke her up. And now she's angry enough to do something about it. The business card is small enough to hide in my palm, but it feels as heavy as a brick as I slip it into my jewelry box next to my hidden declaration. Adult Protective Services, it reads in simple black letters, with a phone number that could change everything. Linda pressed it into my hand yesterday during her second visit, when David was distracted by a work call that couldn't wait. Just in case, she'd whispered, her eyes filled with a concern that both terrified and comforted me. If you ever need help, Margaret. Any kind of help. Now, sitting in my room while David conducts his morning inspection of the kitchen, counting crackers, checking expiration dates, ensuring nothing has been disturbed, I stare at those numbers and try to imagine making that call. What would I say? How do you explain that your son is killing you slowly, methodically, under the guise of love? The phone in my room was disconnected months ago. To reduce confusion, David had explained. All your important calls come through the main line anyway, and I can screen out the scammers and telemarketers. Another layer of control disguised as protection. But I remember something David doesn't know I know: the old landline in the basement still works. I discovered it 3 weeks ago when I went down to the storage room looking for my winter coat. The ancient phone sat on Harold's old workbench, covered in dust but connected to a line that David apparently forgot existed. The basement becomes my planning room, my war room, my sanctuary of rebellion. I make excuses to go down there, looking for photo albums, checking on stored Christmas decorations, anything that sounds innocent and nostalgic. David approves of these trips because they seem to prove I'm engaged in harmless reminiscing rather than anything that might threaten his control. Each journey downstairs is a reconnaissance mission. I test the phone, dial tone steady and clear. I locate my important papers in the file boxes David stored for safekeeping: birth certificate, social security card, insurance documents. I even find my old address book, the leather cover worn soft from years of use, filled with phone numbers of people who probably think I've forgotten them entirely. The first call I make is to my bank. My hands shake so violently I can barely dial, and when the automated system asks for my account information, I realize I don't remember my own account numbers. David has been handling everything for so long that I've lost track of my own financial identity. I'm sorry, ma'am, but without proper identification numbers, I can't access your account information, the customer service representative tells me politely. You'll need to come in person with photo ID and speak with a branch manager. The same response comes from my insurance company, my investment advisor, even the utility companies from my old house, which I discovered David has been renting out for the past year without telling me. Every institution that once knew me as Margaret Chen now knows me only as a number, and I don't have access to those numbers anymore. But there's one number I do remember: Linda's. I dial it with trembling fingers during David's lunch meeting with clients, when I know I have at least an hour of uninterrupted time. Margaret. Her voice is warm with surprise and something else, relief, maybe. How are you, honey? I've been thinking about you constantly since my visit. Linda, I whisper, glancing nervously at the basement stairs even though I know David is gone. I need help. I think David is. The words stick in my throat like broken glass. Are you hurt? Are you safe right now? I'm not hurt, not physically. But Linda, I haven't eaten a full meal in 8 months. He controls everything, my food, my money, my phone calls, my medications. I think he's trying to. I can't finish the sentence. The idea that my own son might be intentionally harming me is still too monstrous to speak aloud. Oh, sweetheart. Linda's voice breaks with emotion. Where are you calling from? Can you get out of the house? I'm in the basement. There's an old phone down here that David doesn't know about. And no, I can't leave. He has my car keys, my credit cards, everything. I don't even know if I have any money left. What follows is 30 minutes of careful planning that feels like military strategy. Linda explains that she's already researched elder abuse resources, that she has contacts at Adult Protective Services, that there are legal aid lawyers who specialize in cases like mine. She offers to pick me up, to let me stay with her, to help me navigate the system that feels so foreign and frightening. But we have to be careful, she warns. If David realizes you're planning to leave, he might escalate the situation. We need to have everything in place before you make your move. Over the following weeks, the basement becomes the headquarters of my rebellion. Linda calls me every Tuesday and Thursday at exactly 2 p.m., when David is usually on conference calls. We develop a communication system. If I don't answer, she knows something is wrong. If I answer but can only say hello, she knows David is nearby and calls back later. I learn that I still have money, quite a lot of it, actually. My teacher's pension, Harold's life insurance, the rental income from my house, all of it accumulating in accounts I can't access. Linda helps me understand that David's power of attorney was supposed to be temporary, designed to help during my recovery, not to permanently strip me of financial independence. The hardest part is finding a safe place to go. Linda offers her guest room, but we both know David would find me there immediately. Instead, she researches senior living communities, not the nursing homes David has threatened me with, but active adult communities where I could have my own apartment, my own life, my own choices about when and what to eat. Willowbrook Gardens, Linda tells me during one of our secret conversations. It's only 20 minutes from your old neighborhood, and they have immediate availability. I drove by yesterday. It's beautiful, Margaret. Independent living with optional services. You could be yourself again. The application process is complicated by my lack of access to documents, but Linda works with the facility's social worker to find solutions. We schedule an appointment for me to visit and meet with the director, planning it for a day when David has his monthly business trip to Chicago. The night before that appointment, I lie in bed staring at the ceiling, terror and hope warring in my chest. In 12 hours, I'll walk out of this house for the first time in months without David's supervision. I'll speak for myself, make decisions for myself, maybe even eat a full meal without asking permission. The woman I used to be, the teacher, the fighter, the survivor, feels closer than she has in months. Tomorrow, I'll start the process of reclaiming her. Of reclaiming myself. I reach into my jewelry box and touch the business card, the hidden declaration, the keys to my old house that Linda helped me get duplicated. These small acts of rebellion have grown into something larger, an escape plan, a new beginning, a chance to prove that Margaret Chen is not ready to disappear. Not yet. Not without a fight. David's voice from that terrible night still echoes in my memory. You're lucky I don't let you starve. But tomorrow, I'll start proving that luck has nothing to do with it. I deserve better than scraps. I deserve better than survival. I deserve a life. The moment has arrived, and I am terrified. Linda sits beside me on the living room couch, her presence a warm anchor in the storm I'm about to unleash. Across from us, David perches on the edge of his chair, his eyes darting between us with barely concealed suspicion. Behind him stands Carol Martinez from Adult Protective Services, her kind but professional demeanor a stark contrast to the family drama about to unfold. It's been 2 weeks since my secret visit to Willowbrook Gardens, 2 weeks since I signed the lease agreement for apartment 12B, 2 weeks since I opened my own checking account with Linda's help and discovered I have enough money to live independently for the rest of my life. David doesn't know any of this yet. In his mind, I'm still his dependent, grateful prisoner. I don't understand why we need a social worker here, David says, his voice tight with controlled irritation. Mom's health is a family matter. We have her doctor, we have a care plan. David, I interrupt, and something in my tone makes him stop mid-sentence. My voice is steadier than it's been in months, strengthened by weeks of secret phone calls and careful planning. I asked Ms. Martinez to come here today because I have something to tell you. The room falls silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the same clock that used to mark the passage of time when this house felt like a home instead of a prison. I look at my son, this man I raised and loved and trusted with my life, and I see the exact moment he realizes his control is slipping. Mom, if this is about your diet again. It's about everything, I say, my hands folded tightly in my lap to keep them from shaking. David, I'm moving out. I've found my own place, and I'll be leaving tomorrow morning. The explosion I expected doesn't come. Instead, David goes very still, his face cycling through expressions I recognize from his childhood, confusion, hurt, and then that calculating look that means he's planning his next move. That's ridiculous, he says finally, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I've learned to dread. Mom, you can't live alone. You're not capable of managing on your own anymore. The fall, the confusion, the memory issues, we've talked about this. You need supervised care. No, I say, and the word feels like breaking chains. I need adequate nutrition, access to my own money, and the right to make my own decisions. I haven't been confused, David. I've been starving. Ms. Martinez shifts slightly in her chair, her trained eyes taking in everything, my hollow cheeks, my loose clothing, the way David's jaw tightens at my accusation. She's already seen the documentation Linda helped me gather, photos of my weight loss, copies of my medical records showing no dietary restrictions, bank statements proving my financial capability. That's completely unfair, David says, standing now, his height used as intimidation just like when he was a teenager trying to win an argument. I've sacrificed everything for you. My home office became your bedroom. Sarah and I adjusted our entire lifestyle. We researched the best nutrition plans for someone your age. You gave me 1,200 calories a day, I interrupt, surprised by the strength in my voice. You locked the pantry. You monitored every bite I took while your family ate normally. That's not care, David. That's abuse. The word hangs in the air like a slap. David's face goes white, then red, cycling through the emotions of someone whose carefully constructed narrative is crumbling. How can you say that? His voice cracks with what sounds like genuine pain. Everything I've done has been to protect you, to keep you healthy and safe. You were eating too much, you were making poor decisions. I was hungry, I say simply. I asked for food, and you told me I was lucky you didn't let me starve. Do you remember saying that, David? Because I remember it every single day. The silence that follows is deafening. I watch my son's face as he realizes his own words are being used against him, as he understands that the phrase he probably thought was forgotten has become the soundtrack of my suffering. I was trying to help you, he whispers, but the conviction is gone from his voice. You were gaining weight after the surgery, and I thought. You thought you had the right to control my body, my food, my life, I finish. But you didn't, David. You never did. Ms. Martinez speaks for the first time since the introductions. Mr. Chen, your mother has the legal right to make her own living arrangements. She's been evaluated by medical professionals who confirm she's mentally competent to make these decisions. David whirls on her, desperation replacing calculation. She's not thinking clearly. The weight loss has affected her judgment. She can't possibly manage an apartment, her medications, her finances. I've been managing my finances since before you were born, I say, standing slowly but steadily. I taught school for 31 years, raised you as a single mother, and survived your father's death. I am not the helpless old woman you've tried to make me believe I am. For the first time in months, I see fear in David's eyes. Not concern for my well-being, real fear of losing control, of facing consequences, of having his carefully maintained image shattered. Mom, please, he says, and now his voice is the pleading tone of a child caught in wrongdoing. Don't do this. Don't break up our family. We can talk about the food situation, make adjustments. But don't leave. Don't make me the villain in some story that isn't true. The manipulation is so familiar, so practiced, that for a moment I almost waver. The pull to comfort him, to make his distress go away, to be the accommodating mother he's trained me to be, it's still there, still powerful. But then I think of the midnight crackers, the shame of asking for food, the way he convinced me I was grateful for starvation. I think of the woman in the photograph, the teacher who never let bullies win. The story is true, David, I say quietly. And I'm not the villain in it. Linda stands beside me, her hand finding mine in a gesture of solidarity that makes my throat tight with gratitude. Ms. Martinez rises as well, her presence a reminder that I'm not alone in this confrontation, that there are people whose job it is to protect vulnerable adults like me. I've already packed, I tell David, my voice growing stronger with each word. My things are in my room. Tomorrow morning, I'm moving to a place where I can eat what I want, when I want, as much as I want. Where I can make my own phone calls and manage my own money and remember that I'm a person, not a problem to be solved. David slumps back into his chair, the fight going out of him as he realizes this isn't a negotiation. This is a declaration of independence from a woman he thought he'd successfully broken. I love you, he says, and for the first time in months, it sounds like he might actually mean it. I thought I was helping. I know, I say, and I find that I mean it too. But love without respect isn't love at all. It's just control with a prettier name. As I walk toward my room to get my suitcases, I hear David's voice one more time behind me, Mom, what if you can't manage on your own? What if something happens? I turn back to look at him, this son I raised, this man who nearly destroyed me in the name of care, and I smile for the first time in months. Then I'll handle it, I say. The same way I handled everything else before I let you convince me I couldn't. For the first time in 2 years, I'm not lucky that someone else isn't letting me starve. I'm free to feed myself.